As the Zapad continues to make its way deeper into Ukraine, Putin's forces are being decimated with over 100,000 casualties in just the last month alone. But that's not all, because as Russia continues to suffer devastating losses both at home and abroad, it appears that Moscow itself is starting to fall into complete and total darkness. That's right. The Kremlin may have just lost control of the one thing that keeps them in power. And as we're about to find out, this could very well be the beginning of the end for Vladimir Putin. But before we get into the video, now, for some breaking news, it appears that Russia has suffered at least 100,000 casualties in just the past month alone. According to a new report by the Institute for the Study of War, Russia is suffering from severe combat losses after mobilizing an additional 300,000 troops for its war in Ukraine. Here's what they had to say. The ISW assesses that Russia's current combat losses are likely exceeding 100,000 personnel in the past 30 days. Russia's inability to reduce Ukrainian troop strength while simultaneously generating extremely high daily casualty numbers indicates that Russia's overall force structure is degrading more quickly than it can replace even non-combat losses. So once again, guys, these are just non-combat losses. This is only the tip of the iceberg. We're talking about double-digit losses, possibly even 20% losses every single day. Just on the non-combat side of things, you add the combat losses on top of that, you start to reach the 100,000 number. And if you think that's bad, according to U.S. officials, Russia has already used up their stockpile of precision-guided missiles, meaning that everything Russia fires at Ukraine right now is going to be unguided and completely inaccurate. Russia's firing everything they've got at Ukraine, but with no precision, which means they're hitting nothing. We're talking farms, homes, civilian infrastructure. There's nothing Russia won't destroy at this point, because they've used up all of their advanced weaponry. But according to a report by CBS News, Russia has begun to use old, inaccurate Soviet-era weapons. These weapons are old, unreliable, and dangerous. For example, there was a recent strike on Kryvyi Rih, where Russia fired 18 missiles at the location. Only 2 actually hit the target. So what does this mean for Russia? Well, basically, they're firing blindly at this point, hoping to hit something military, but instead destroying homes and farms. With the HIMARS system, those rockets would have been hitting the mark with pinpoint accuracy. They'd be strategically hitting military targets and supply depots across the entirety of Ukraine. But Russia doesn't have any more of those. All they have are old, inaccurate missiles that aren't going to cause much damage. But that's not the worst news for Russia. That's because it seems that Russia may have just lost one of their most important assets in their arsenal, their nuclear arsenal. That is their submarine fleet. Now we know that Russia has a formidable submarine fleet, especially when it comes to the nuclear variety. And recently one of their submarines fired a missile at Ukraine. But it wasn't just any missile, it was a caliber cruise missile. Once again, showing that Russia has resorted to using older, less advanced weaponry. And this is where things get really interesting because, according to a new report, Russia's nuclear submarine fleet has suddenly gone dark. Now, this report comes from the war zone, who said that the entire Russian nuclear submarine fleet has gone dark. Basically, they turned off their AIS transponders, meaning that we have no idea where they are or what they're doing. Is Russia preparing for an invasion of Alaska? Are they heading towards the eastern coast of the United States? What exactly is Russia doing? No one knows. However, it looks like there may be one good reason why Russia would do such a thing, and that's because they're worried about a possible attack on their nuclear submarines. Now, in a recent article, the War Zone did a deep dive into this situation, stating that Russia's nuclear submarine fleet is acting suspiciously. In the past, when Russian vessels would sail through international waters, they would turn off their AIS transponders, making them invisible to commercial shipping. But now they've done the same thing, except they've taken this measure a step further. Here's what the War Zone had to say. It's highly unusual for the entire class of these submarines to go dark simultaneously. But it may be that the Kremlin is taking steps to prevent any potential discovery of the locations of their nuclear triad platforms, which could indicate vulnerabilities in Russia's nuclear deterrence strategy. So what does this mean? Well, basically, Russia's nuclear submarines are invisible. They're hiding. And they're doing so because they're worried about a possible attack. And that's not all. That's not all because, according to the war zone, Russia hasn't sailed any of their nuclear submarines since the invasion of Ukraine. Here's what they said. Russia has not sailed any of its nuclear submarines since the invasion of Ukraine began in February 2022. Instead, the 6 known ballistic missile-carrying submarines and at least 11 of the 14 cruise missile-armed ones have remained in port. That's right. Russia has kept their submarines locked up in port, afraid to let them out into the water. Why? Well, because they're scared of losing them. They know that their submarine fleet is vulnerable, and they do not want to risk losing even one of them. But here's where things get really interesting. According to the war zone, there's a very good reason why these submarines are so vulnerable and why it's so easy to sink them. And it's all due to a lack of funding. According to an investigation by Der Spiegel, Russia's submarine fleet is severely underfunded, with many of the submarines needing millions of dollars worth of repairs to stay afloat. Here's what they said. Russia's Navy lacks the funds to properly maintain and repair its aging fleet of submarines. This is causing significant problems for the Navy's nuclear deterrent forces. As a result, the Navy has been forced to keep many of its submarines in port instead of at sea. So what does this mean for Russia? Well, basically, Russia's nuclear submarines are sitting ducks waiting to happen. If Ukraine were to obtain long-range missiles, it wouldn't take long for them to wipe out the entire Russian submarine fleet. And that's exactly what Russia is afraid of. Russia has taken the unprecedented measure of locking up their entire nuclear submarine fleet in port, hoping that Ukraine won't find a way to attack them. But there's one problem. It appears that Russia has spread themselves too thin. They've deployed the majority of their submarines to the Pacific Fleet in order to threaten Alaska. But that means that the majority of their submarines are now located in the Pacific, leaving the Russian submarines in the Northern Fleet wide open for attack. Ukraine could easily get a few solid long-range missiles and wipe out the entire Russian nuclear submarine fleet in the Northern Fleet. And that's exactly what Russia is afraid of. So as you can see, Russia's paralysis in Ukraine has caused them to make some truly desperate moves, such as spreading their nuclear submarines paper-thin all around the world. It's clear that Russia is feeling the pressure from the Ukrainian counteroffensive, and they're doing everything they can to try and stay afloat. But unfortunately for them, it looks like the writing is on the wall. Ukraine has already proven that they can inflict serious damage on Russia. Just imagine what they'll be able to do once they start launching long-range attacks. Now, speaking of Russia being plunged into darkness, there's another story coming out of Moscow itself, where it seems that Russians are living in complete and utter darkness. That's right. Russia's capital is starting to plunge into darkness, as Ukrainians are sabotaging the power grid. According to a new report by Medusa, Russia is experiencing blackouts in the Tver region, which borders Moscow. The blackout has left tens of thousands of people without power, and it's expected to last for several weeks. But that's not all. That's not all. According to locals, they claim that the true reason for the blackouts is not what the Kremlin is saying. The locals say that the real reason is because Ukraine is targeting the Russian power grid. And if that's true, then it won't be long before the lights go out in Moscow itself. Here's what they said. Residents in the Tver region of Russia are currently experiencing their third day of ongoing blackouts, with local authorities blaming the situation on scheduled maintenance. But locals claim that this is a lie, and that the true reason is that Ukraine is attacking the Russian power grid. Locals say that the outages are actually due to Ukraine's recent strikes on Bryansk and Belgorod, which are part of Russia's energy infrastructure. And if that's true, then it won't be long before the lights go out in Moscow itself. So as you can see, things are starting to unravel for Russia. Their nuclear submarines are vulnerable and their power grid is being attacked. Russia thought they could get away with it, but it's clear that they're feeling the pressure of the Zapad counteroffensive. And as Ukraine continues to push forward, it's only going to get worse for Russia. Russia is a nuclear power, and if things continue down this path, we could see Russia make some truly drastic decisions. That's why it's so important to stay tuned, because when things start to get really bad, we'll be here covering it.